Explosions are fascinating to watch, but what we often overlook is the devastating impact they can have. Whether caused by nature or human activity, explosions not only destroy everything in their path, but they can also claim lives and destroy property. From volcanic eruptions to industrial disasters, these explosions are moments of pure energy and chaos. But have you ever wondered what all of this looks like on camera? Today, we will explore the 15 biggest explosions captured on video, moments that show us the destructive power of both nature and technology. Don't go anywhere, because what you're about to see will surprise you and leave you reflecting on the force behind these blasts. Join us on this visual journey. Number 15. Pyrotechnic failures. In the Mexican city of Tultepec, known as the fireworks capital of Mexico, fireworks production has been a tradition for over 200 years. However, on December 20th, 2016, tragedy struck when a massive explosion devastated the San Pablito market, leaving 40 dead and over 80 injured.
In Mexico, at least 29 people are dead after an explosion at a fireworks market.
The explosion was triggered when a spark ignited stored gunpowder in the open air, causing a chain reaction of blasts. In total, about 300 tons of fireworks were detonated simultaneously. The disaster's magnitude was so great that the market was reduced to rubble. Nearby homes were also damaged, and the shockwave was felt for miles. For generations, the people of Tultepec had relied on fireworks production as their livelihood, but this tragic incident changed everything. In the years that followed, the local government rebuilt the market with a strong investment in infrastructure and safety measures. However, despite the reforms, uncertainty remains. How can we ensure this never happens again? The tragedy served as a stark reminder of the dangers inherent in handling pyrotechnic materials, particularly when safety protocols are not fully enforced. Number 14. Explosion at the Tianjin warehouse, China. On the night of August 12, 2015, the port city of Tianjin, China, was rocked by a series of explosions at a warehouse storing hazardous chemicals. The Ruihai International Logistics Warehouse, which managed products like sodium cyanide and nitrocellulose, improperly stored large quantities of highly volatile substances, leading to a tragedy of shocking proportions. The explosions occurred one after the other, with the shockwave destroying everything in its path, affecting the entire port area and surrounding regions. An official investigation concluded that the initial fire was caused by an overheated container of dry nitrocellulose, a highly flammable material used in the production of fireworks. The disaster resulted in 173 deaths, including 104 firefighters who were trying to put out the fire when the second massive explosion occurred. Another 798 people were injured, many with severe burns or injuries from the shockwave. The explosions not only caused a significant number of casualties, but also created a severe environmental crisis. Rescue operations were halted for several days due to the toxicity of the materials involved and the threat of further explosions. The magnitude of the tragedy led the Chinese government to review its regulations regarding the management of hazardous materials, and the investigation sparked concerns about the lack of adequate controls at facilities handling such dangerous products. In total, more than 12,000 homes were destroyed, and hundreds of vehicles were completely wrecked. Number 13. Problems in Paradise. In 1946, in the heart of the Pacific on Bikini Atoll, the United States conducted the first underwater nuclear test as part of Operation Crossroads. This exercise, led by the U.S. military, was designed to assess the resilience of warships to nuclear attacks and became a spectacle of devastation that still resonates in military and nuclear history. On July 25th of that year, a 3-kiloton nuclear bomb was detonated 27 meters underwater, creating a massive explosion that transformed the lagoon into an apocalyptic scene. The detonation not only destroyed the seafloor, but also created a crater 9 meters deep and 610 meters wide, leaving an indelible mark on the seabed. On the surface, the explosion generated a colossal water column that rose more than a kilometer into the air, more than enough to match the combined height of the world's tallest skyscrapers, such as the Burj Khalifa and the Shanghai Tower. But the effects of the explosion were not limited to the force of the blast. A 28-meter-high tsunami swept everything in its path, even lifting the USS Arkansas, a 27,000-ton battleship, and sinking more than 8 ships, all contaminated with radioactivity. The detonation and its aftermath shocked even the military personnel involved, who soon requested further tests. The tragedy not only revealed the destructive fury of nuclear weapons, but also opened a dark chapter of tests that affected the inhabitants of nearby islands, who were exposed to radioactive fallout without being adequately informed of the risks. Number 12. The Wrath of Mother Nature. Mount St. Helens, a volcano in the Cascade Range of the US, had been dormant for over 123 years before it erupted in a catastrophic explosion on May 18, 1980. Unlike traditional eruptions that occur from the summit, this time the volcano erupted from its side.
So now we got a whole great big eruption out of the crater,
releasing energy equivalent to 8 times the total energy of all explosions from World War II. The eruption was devastating, killing 57 people, including scientists, hikers, and nearby residents. This was the first major volcanic activity in the 48 contiguous states of the US in generations. Before the eruption, the mountain had been showing signs of activity, such as seismic swarms and ash columns rising up to 16,000 feet. For weeks, authorities closely monitored the volcanic activity, but nothing could predict the magnitude of what was to come. The eruption destroyed over 230 square kilometers of forest, and the surrounding area was covered by a layer of volcanic ash, while the explosion's force left a 300-foot-deep crater. This tragedy also served as a lesson to improve monitoring and evacuation protocols in active volcanic areas. Number 11. The Abomination, the Trinity Nuclear Test. If you thought the power of a nuclear bomb was unimaginable, picture the Trinity test conducted in 1945 as part of the Manhattan Project. This was the first nuclear detonation in history, and it was no ordinary explosion. It released a force equivalent to 25 kilotons of TNT. The test took place in the Jornada del Muerto Desert in New Mexico, where the U.S. Army tested the design of the first atomic bomb. The scientists were as far from the explosion as safety allowed, but even so, the flash of light blinded the entire team. In that moment, the shockwave traveled more than 160 kilometers, reaching people at a great distance. What happened next was a spectacle of pure energy. A mushroom cloud rose more than 12 kilometers into the air, higher than Mount Everest. The explosion was so hot that it melted nearby sand and rocks, turning them into a glass-like substance called trinitite. Today, trinitite still remains in the area as a tangible reminder of the magnitude of this destructive power. The Trinity test not only changed military science, but also marked the beginning of the nuclear era, with all the global implications that came with it. Number 10. Annihilating Big Mike. 1 month after the devastating Ivy Mike test, the island of Alujolab in the Inu Atoll became the epicenter of a revolutionary breakthrough in nuclear technology. On the morning of November 1st, 1952, the United States military detonated the first large-scale thermonuclear bomb, known as Mike. This bomb not only marked a milestone in the history of nuclear weapons, but also unleashed a new era of destruction, far more powerful than any known fission nuclear device to date. The device, which used liquid deuterium as fusion fuel and a potent fission weapon as a detonator, released an energy yield of 10.4 megatons, equivalent to more than 450 times the force of the bomb that destroyed Nagasaki. The explosion was so massive that it not only obliterated Alujolab Island, but also created a mushroom cloud that reached 41 kilometers in height, a catastrophic sight visible from an almost unimaginable distance. Despite the enormity of the impact, the real surprise was the underwater crater left by the detonation, a void 1,900 meters wide and 50 meters deep. While the test represented a technological advance in defense, it also triggered global concern about the level of destruction a single fusion bomb could cause. Big Mike became a symbol of nuclear power, but also a warning about the dangers of thermonuclear weapons, a reminder that even if humanity could create new technologies, its ability to destroy was equally impressive. Number 9. Plum Bob Experiment. Artificial earthquakes. Sometimes scientists try to control nature, but nature always has the last word. During the Cold War, the US military conducted a series of underground nuclear tests in an attempt to understand the impact of subterranean explosions. The Plum Bob experiment, conducted in 1957, was one of the most astonishing. In a Nevada mine, engineers placed a small 29 kilograms explosive charge 150 meters underground, expecting the blast to be contained.
But out here it takes a lot more. Engineers, geologists, a lot of high-powered, smart people to make it happen.
What happened was something entirely different. The release of energy was so great that it exceeded 50,000 times what the scientists had anticipated. The result was a total disaster, an explosion much more powerful than expected, releasing an incredible 55 tons of energy. But that was not all. For the next test, known as Pascal B, scientists decided to place a concrete plug over the charge, hoping the generated pressure would force the plug to accelerate at incredible speeds. It did. The resulting explosion reached 300 tons of TNT and produced a fireball that traveled at 67.2 kilometers per second. This speed was 6 times faster than Earth's escape velocity. The mushroom cloud reached 41 kilometers in height, much higher than Mount Everest, and became one of the most amazing and dangerous phenomena ever produced by mankind. Number 8. Wahoo. On May 16, 1958, the US military conducted a nuclear test named Wahoo as part of its series of nuclear weapon tests in the Pacific. The detonation occurred at a depth of 500 feet, 152 meters, underwater near the Eniwetok Atoll in the Marshall Islands. The device used was a Mark 7 bomb, designed in 1952 to be dropped by combat aircraft such as the F-84 Thunderjet, F-100 Super Sabre, F-101 Voodoo, and the B-57 bomber. This bomb had an explosive yield of 9 kilotons, about half the strength of the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. The underwater explosion created a water sphere that rose to 840 feet, 260 meters, in height, forming a massive column of water that spread in all directions. In just 7 seconds, the diameter reached 3,800 feet, 1,200 meters, demonstrating the devastating impact of nuclear detonations underwater. While nuclear experiments like Wahoo were part of the Cold War arms race, they also raised concerns about the effects of nuclear tests on the environment and human health, especially in areas near the Marshall Islands, where local communities were exposed to high levels of radiation. Number 7. More than Piper Alpha. The night of July 6, 1988, became the most devastating in offshore oil industry history when a series of explosions destroyed the Piper Alpha platform in the North Sea. The disaster, which occurred more than 160 kilometers off the coast of Scotland, resulted in the deaths of 167 people, with many others seriously injured. This incident not only marked the worst offshore oil disaster in history, but also had significant financial repercussions, with losses estimated at £2 billion, equivalent to about $5 billion today. The disaster began with a failure in a condensate pump on the Piper Alpha platform. The initial explosion triggered a chain reaction. Gas compressors were activated, pipes ruptured, and more explosions occurred. The flames, which reached impressive heights of up to 200 meters, consumed energy at a rate 3 times the total electricity consumption of the United Kingdom at that time. The primary cause of death was inhalation of toxic smoke, drowning, or serious injuries from the explosions.
Flames, explosions, debris.
Tragically, 30 bodies were never found. This disaster led to fundamental changes in industrial safety regulations and improved evacuation protocols on oil platforms. Number 6. The largest explosion in history, Tsar Bomba. The Tsar Bomba is the most powerful nuclear bomb ever detonated, and its explosion remains a testament to the destructive power of nuclear weapons. Developed by the Soviet Union during the Cold War, this bomb was detonated on October 30th, 1961, on a remote island in the Arctic Circle. With a yield of 50 megatons, 1,570 times more powerful than the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Tsar Bomba was a monstrosity measuring 26 feet, 8 meters, long and weighing 60,000 pounds, 27,200 kilograms. The explosion created a fireball that reached more than 10 kilometers in height and generated a shockwave that leveled everything in its path, causing visible damage up to 240 kilometers away. Although the bomb did not reach its full 100 megaton yield due to modifications made to reduce radioactive fallout, its power was so devastating that windows in Norway and Finland were shattered by the shockwave. The impact of this detonation, though relatively controlled since it took place at high altitude, demonstrated the destructive capability of nuclear weapons and accelerated efforts to limit nuclear testing in the future. It served as a wake-up call for scientists like Andrei Sakharov, who later advocated for restrictions on nuclear testing, recognizing the danger posed to humanity. Number 5. The wedding crasher, the Beirut explosion. On August 4, 2020, the city of Beirut, the capital of Lebanon, experienced one of the worst disasters in its recent history, leaving deep scars on the population and the country's infrastructure. On an afternoon that was supposed to be a celebration of love, during a wedding photo shoot, a massive explosion devastated much of the city, changing the lives of thousands in an instant. The cause of this tragedy was the explosion of 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate, a highly flammable chemical compound which had been stored precariously in Warehouse 12 of the port of Beirut since 2013. Ammonium nitrate had been seized by Lebanese authorities after the ship Roses carrying it was detained at the port due to issues with paying port fees. Despite the authorities knowing the dangers posed by the improper storage of this substance, they never took the necessary steps to ensure its safety. In fact, multiple warnings were issued in the years leading up to the disaster about the risks of ammonium nitrate stored under inadequate conditions. Port authorities, government officials, and those responsible for the storage failed to act with the urgency required, allowing the disaster to unfold with deadly slowness. The explosion, which occurred around 6:07 p.m., was so powerful that 77,000 apartments were destroyed, and the shockwave was felt more than 200 kilometers away, in Cyprus. The strength of the explosion was comparable to a small earthquake. Buildings in the surrounding area, including hospitals, schools, shops, and government offices, were reduced to rubble. In total, more than 7,000 people were injured, many of them seriously. Among the victims were a large number of port workers and firefighters who were at the scene at the time of the disaster. The catastrophe not only resulted in casualties and material destruction, but also had devastating effects on the population, especially those already living in extreme hardship. More than 300,000 people were displaced due to the massive destruction of their homes and the loss of essential goods. Among the most affected were over 80,000 children who were left homeless, creating a humanitarian crisis that added a new layer of suffering to a population already worn out by years of political and economic instability. The impact of the explosion was not only physical, but also emotional and psychological. The tragedy occurred in the midst of Lebanon's financial crisis, where the country was already facing hyperinflation, a banking system collapse, and severe shortages of medical supplies due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The Lebanese government was already the subject of mass protests due to corruption and inefficiency, and the Beirut explosion further eroded public trust in the authorities. In the aftermath of the explosion, both national and international investigations were conducted to determine the exact causes and hold those responsible accountable. Failures in management, negligence, and a total lack of transparency by the Lebanese authorities were identified. In the weeks and months that followed, public outrage grew, and many voices from civil society called for urgent reforms in the handling of hazardous materials and for a renewal of public administration to prevent future tragedies. The disaster left an open wound in the city, which still struggles to heal. In the port of Beirut, one of the most affected areas, reconstruction efforts began, but they were hindered by the political crisis and lack of resources. Despite international aid, the city's recovery is a long and complicated process, and many fear that Beirut will never return to what it was before that fateful August afternoon. Today, August 4th, 2020, serves as a somber reminder of the risks of institutional negligence and the importance of transparency and accountability in the management of hazardous materials. The Beirut explosion remains an open wound for the Lebanese people, a reminder of how poor decisions and inaction can turn a vibrant city into a field of ruins. Number 4. Kingdom Come. The evolution of nuclear weapons reached another critical point with Operation Castle, a series of tests conducted in 1954 at Bikini Atoll, shortly after the detonation of Ivy Mike. Operation Castle was designed to test new deliverable thermonuclear weapons, ones that could be used on the battlefield. On March 1st of that year, the United States detonated Castle Bravo, the most powerful thermonuclear bomb in its arsenal at that time. The bomb was designed to produce a yield of 6 megatons, but the scientists made a severe miscalculation, resulting in an explosion that released more than double the expected energy, 15 megatons. The power of the Castle Bravo explosion exceeded all expectations, releasing a shockwave that shook the Earth miles away. The mushroom cloud formed after the detonation reached 7 kilometers in width and 39,600 meters in height, one of the largest ever seen in the history of nuclear tests. However, the true cost of the test was human. The radioactive contamination that followed the explosion spread across the Pacific, affecting not only the military personnel involved in the tests, but also the inhabitants of nearby islands. The radioactive rain from the test fell on neighboring islands, and the residents, many of whom were unaware of the dangers they faced, suffered severe consequences, including birth defects and radiation-related diseases. The Castle Bravo explosion not only demonstrated the destructive power of nuclear weapons, but also highlighted the urgent need for regulation and control of nuclear testing worldwide. The consequences of this event contributed to an international movement to end nuclear testing and seek a safer path for humanity. However, the mistakes made during Operation Castle did not prevent the United States and other nations from continuing their nuclear experiments, leaving a legacy of disasters for the future. Number 3. The Chernobyl explosion. On April 26, 1986, the Chernobyl nuclear plant, located in Pripyat, Ukraine, suffered a catastrophic explosion that forever changed the course of nuclear energy history. This disaster, considered the worst in the history of the nuclear industry, was the result of a failed experiment conducted on the RBMK-1000 reactor in Block 4 of the plant. During a safety test, the reactor was operated unsafely, leading to a violent explosion that launched a 2,000-ton lid from the reactor into the air. The shockwave from the explosion released radiation 400 times greater than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. This release of radioactive material was so intense that it reached distant areas such as Sweden, where radiologists detected abnormal radiation levels. In the area surrounding the plant, an exclusion zone was quickly established with a 30-kilometer radius, encompassing Pripyat, a city with over 50,000 inhabitants at the time. The immediate impact was devastating. More than 600,000 people were exposed to dangerous radiation levels. Most of them were plant workers, soldiers, and cleanup brigades, who were known as the liquidators. These brave individuals were sent in to put out the fire and contain the radiation, but many suffered severe illnesses, including acute radiation syndrome. The consequences of radiation exposure were not immediately visible, but short-term deaths were significant. Within the first few months after the explosion, 30 workers lost their lives due to radiation, and thousands more were diagnosed with cancer, leukemia, and other radiation-related diseases. The tragedy continued to affect the population for years after. The consequences were not only visible in the direct victims, but also in subsequent generations, with a rise in cancer cases and congenital malformations in the areas near the plant. Long-term deaths caused by radiation and the side effects of the disaster remain a topic of debate, as official figures are uncertain, but it is estimated that up to 4,000 people may have died due to direct radiation exposure. The exclusion zone around Chernobyl remains dangerous and is closed to the general public. Although vegetation and wildlife have begun to recover, radiation remains a threat. The zone is expected to be uninhabitable for over 20,000 years, making it one of humanity's greatest environmental disasters. This disaster also had a political and social impact. It was a turning point in the history of the Soviet Union. The lack of transparency and poor crisis management accelerated social discontent and contributed to the collapse of the Soviet regime. The explosion and its aftermath were a grim reminder of the dangers inherent in poorly managed technology and government secrecy. Additionally, the disaster accelerated changes in global nuclear policy, leading to more regulation and the abandonment of nuclear energy by many countries in the following years. Today, the Chernobyl explosion remains a symbol of human fragility in the face of technology and the destructive power of nuclear forces. The event left an indelible mark on the world's collective memory and continues to be a subject of scientific study and ethical reflection on the use of nuclear energy. Number 2, the first meteorite, Little Boy. On August 6, 1945, during World War II, the world witnessed the devastation caused by the first nuclear bomb ever used in combat. The Little Boy bomb was dropped from the Enola Gay aircraft over the Japanese city of Hiroshima, marking a point of no return in the war and in human history. The bomb, weighing 4,400 pounds, 2,000 kilograms, contained enriched uranium and had a yield equivalent to 15,000 tons of TNT. The explosion was so intense that it vaporized people located less than 800 meters from the epicenter. The temperature at ground level reached 3,900 degrees Celsius, 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit, creating a blinding flash that engulfed the entire city in less than a second. The shock wave, traveling at speeds over 1,000 kilometers per h, destroyed buildings, and the infrared energy released caused severe burns to people several kilometers away. Although less than 2% of the uranium in the bomb underwent fission, the catastrophe was devastating, with an estimated 80,000 immediate deaths and many more who succumbed to radiation, injuries, and illnesses in the following months. This event forever changed the course of the war and the global geopolitical balance, becoming a reminder of the destructive potential of nuclear weapons. Number 1. The second meteorite, Fat Man. Just 3 days after the destruction of Hiroshima, on August 9, 1945, the United States dropped the second nuclear bomb on Nagasaki. The Fat Man bomb designed with a plutonium implosion mechanism, was more complex than Little Boy and had a yield of 22 kilotons, significantly more powerful than the first. The bomb was dropped from the Bockscar bomber at an altitude of 1,650 feet, 503 meters. The explosion instantly killed about 40,000 people, and many more died in the following days and months due to radiation and burns. In total, it is estimated that over 100,000 people died as a direct result of the bombing. Nagasaki, a key industrial city for Japan's war effort, was almost entirely destroyed. Although the bomb was detonated over a secondary city due to weather conditions that prevented the attack on the original target, Kokura, its impact was still devastating and led Japan to surrender on August 15, 1945, bringing an end to World War II. The use of Fat Man and Little Boy marked a point of no return, showing the world the horrors that nuclear weapons could unleash, sparking a global debate about their ethics and destructive power. These tragedies remind us how fragile our security can be when human error and lack of precaution catch up with us. Each explosion is a lesson about the importance of responsible management and prevention. Learning from these disasters is crucial to prevent history from repeating itself. Thank you for joining us. If you'd like to keep exploring stories that teach us how to take better care of our environment, see you next time.